Welcome to the course. For this week, we're going to be looking at the fundamental lessons about individual decision making that people face in economics. Economics is about choices and the decisions that we have to make. When we look at individual decisions, you know that people are facing trade-offs among alternative goals. And then the cost of any action is measured in terms of the foregone opportunities. That rationale, people make decisions by comparing the marginal costs and the marginal benefits, and that people change their behavior in response to incentives that they face. The fundamental lesson about interactions among people are that trade and interdependence can be mutually beneficial, that markets are usually a good way of coordinating economic activity among people, and that the government can potentially improve market outcomes by remedying a market failure or by promoting some greater economic equality. Last thing we're going to be focusing on within this section is the fundamental lesson about an economy as a whole, or that productivity is the ultimate source of living standards, that the growth in the quantity of money is the ultimate source of inflation, and that society faces a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So those are some of the topics we're going to be discussing in the class. When we look at an economist, economists try to address their subject with a scientist objectivity. Like all scientists, they make appropriate assumptions and build simplified models to understand the world around them. Two simple economic models are the circular flow diagram and the production possibility frontier. The field of economics is divided into two subfields, micro and macro. Microeconomics studies decision-making by households and firms and the interaction among households and firms in the marketplace. Macroeconomics studied the forces and trends that affect the economy as a whole. Now, a positive statement is an assertion about the world and how it is. A normative statement is looking at what the world ought to be. When economists make normative statements, they're acting more as policy advisors than as scientists. So you're going to see a lot of statements are going to be more normative or positive. They're going to be both of those. Economists who advise policymakers sometimes offer conflicting advice, either because of differences in scientific judgments or because of differences in values. At other times, economists are united in the advice they offer, but policymakers may choose to ignore the advice because of the many forces and constraints imposed by political processes. So you'll notice that we're going to have a lot of political implications in the decisions that we have to make, and those will be important when we study the modules this week. Some other topics that we're going to look at is looking at trade. Each person consumes goods and services produced around many other people or produced in the U.S. Interdependence in trade are desirable because they allow everyone to enjoy a greater quantity and variety of goods and services. There are two ways to compare the ability of two people to produce a good. The person can either produce the good having an absolute advantage, or they can produce the good having a comparative advantage. Both of those instances are reasons why we trade. Now, the gains from trade are based off of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is looking at the person that has the lower opportunity costs. In theory, trade makes everyone better off because it allows people to specialize in those activities in which they have a comparative advantage. The principle of comparative advantage applies to countries as well to people. Economists use the principles of comparative advantage to advocate free trade among countries. So these are just some of the topics that we're going to be focused on this week. If you have any questions, just let me know.